I wanted to talk about my favourite philosophy that I don't really follow and the reasons why. And it's Stoicism. It's an ancient Greek and Roman philosophy. It's a virtue ethic where they focus on the idea of good flowing from a person's character and whether or not they exhibit the virtues of wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. And I think having a bit of this kind of perspective is probably good for people. Now, the book that I value the most is called Enchiridion. It's a book by Arrian, and it's a summary of lecture notes by Epictetus. And I guess you would call this a summary of his teachings. A book of quotes is another way of looking at it. And a lot of diehard Stoics will caution against just reading this book and using it as a book of quotes. And I can see why. There is a lot of background and there's a lot of subtlety and a lot of detail behind it when you read more. But from a mimetic point of view, I actually like the easily memorable and quotable nature of a lot of this stuff in this book. And the thing about these quotes is that you can use them as mantras. It's sort of the good version of what they do in cults. They replace their thoughts of self-preservation and, proportion and perspective with repetitive parasitic thoughts that keep them involved in the cult. Whereas if you use these kinds of quotes as mantras, from what I've seen, they're mostly going to be mutualistic. They're going to replace compulsive, resentful, non-constructive thought patterns with ones that let you get on better in life as a human being. So I'm just going to take two of the many things in the Enchiridion to give examples of what I found most significant and useful. The first is chapter 1. It's what's often called the dichotomy of control, which is not necessarily the most useful way of looking at it, but that's what they call it. You'll find a lot of search results if that's what you look for. Stoicism, dichotomy of control. Basically, it's an explicit statement of which things are properly your own to be in charge of, as opposed to everything else. And the things that you are in charge of, according to Stoic thought, are your opinions, your desires and your aversions, and your intentions. And anything else and everything else, including especially things like your body and what condition it's in, your property, especially your reputation to other people, they are all dependent on things that are not properly your own. And after, laying out which things are in which category, there's a powerful call to why you would want to follow this, I recommend reading it. I will link a very good side-by-side translation website in the description. Now, an interesting philosophical point that I first got from other writings relating to this in Stoicism, but I think is very important, is this dichotomy that's been drawn up. It couldn't be any other way without tyranny or godhood on your part. How could you control what other people think of you without taking away, their right to decide what they think of you, and so on? How could you, without being a god, control what happens to your body, what happens in the world outside of you? So they were very religious, the Stoics, especially Epictetus, and they believed in gods of the ancient Greek and Roman variety. But even if you're not religious, you can see the underlying point. And I think that's a good sign about a philosophy. If you don't have to take on all of the trappings but still find something of value. Now, the part of the Enchiridion that was most practically valuable to me in life, I don't remember what the chapter number is, but if you search for the term handles, you'll find it very quickly. So there's a quotation, and I'm not going to get it completely right from memory, but it goes something like, everything has two handles, one by which it can be carried and one by which it cannot. If your brother wrongs you and you try to take it by this handle, you will not be able to bear it. But if you instead take it by the handle that he is your brother and that you're brought up together, by that handle you'll be able to carry it. Now, to me, this is a perfect example of a meme that will help you replace resentment and feud with a positive focus on the relationship that you have with a person. And I know for me, having this replace resentment for someone in my life and allow me to mend that relationship did not come a year too soon. He died, I think, less than a year after this had fully done its work. And I'm very glad of that. So it should already be obvious why I recommend Stoicism. It's basically a collection of mutualistic memes, and you can do so much worse. So why don't I follow Stoicism? There's a few interrelated issues, and two big ones are providence and repression. When you look into Stoicism and really think about it, and try and ingrain it and justify it to yourself, you'll realize that it relies on the idea of providence, relies on you letting go on the understanding that everything will be okay according to the wiser plan of gods or perhaps you could find a version of it where the universe is somehow conspiring to make things right and you just don't see it. I don't believe in providence. I've never found it to be justified. I am by nature epistemically rationalistic and skeptical, and just believing in providence is not something that I can do. And the other part of it is repression. If you take, say, a bunch of warped thoughts based on out of control emotions and passions, and you use these memes to counteract them, that's probably a good thing on balance. But there's a fine line between your emotions and the values that underlie them. And some of those values aren't up for grab just because it would probably feel nice. Okay. So what you can find yourself doing is, in an effort to improve yourself, repressing your values. And for me, what I found was that I value externals, what the Stoics call externals, which are the things that are not properly your own. They're not the things that lead to freedom and virtue. And they include such things as caring whether your children live or die. And this ties back into providence. Like, I guess if you really truly have ingrained the idea that if you only worry about the things that are truly your own and that everything else is okay from a moral point of view, then I guess that works. But for me, it doesn't. And there are other things as well. Like, there are other things in life that I want. And I find that I'm just repressing those values. And the snapback from that can be quite intense, as anyone who's ever gone on a long campaign of repression that then failed will tell you. So, yeah, there's a lot of motivated reasoning in Stoicism. It's a perfect example of instrumental rationality. Believing something because if you believe something, you will probably be better off. And you'll probably be better. But it's not in my nature or personality to be able to do that. If I can't justify it as actually being true, if it seems to contradict other things, other philosophies, other values, and I just can't ingrain it, well, I'm not going to follow that philosophy. But there are always going to be times in my life where I'm glad that I repeated over and over these quotes, where I read the Enchiridion again and again, that I got an understanding of Stoicism. So even though I don't follow it, I can't reconcile it, doesn't mean you can't. Maybe you can be epistemically rational and ingrain the lessons of Stoicism. And if you can, I'd love to hear how. And I'm very glad for you. That's excellent.